Every day, we use money. We earn it, we spend it, we save it. It feels solid, real. But we rarely stop to ask a very simple but very deep question. The story we're told is that governments are in charge, that central banks print the cash in your wallet, and that this power belongs to nations, to the people. But behind the headlines, behind the flags and the familiar symbols, there is another system at play. A system built not on printing presses, but on debt, trust, and a whole lot of digital code. So, to really understand this system, we first have to unlearn the story we think we know. We have to peel back the layers on a fundamental illusion about how money actually works. Now, we all learned this in school, right? The idea that you deposit your money and the bank takes that money and lends it to someone else. It makes perfect sense. Except that's not how it works. The reality, and this is according to the Bank of England itself, is that when a bank makes a loan, say for a mortgage, it doesn't lend out existing money. It creates brand new digital money right then and there with just a few keystrokes. In that moment, new money is literally born from debt. And the scale of this is, well, it's pretty staggering. Only about 3% of the money in an economy like the UK's is physical cash on coins. The other 97%, that's the digital money created by private commercial banks every time they issue a loan. So think about what that means. The power to create almost all of our money supply doesn't rest with the government. It's in the hands of the private banking sector.
But this system doesn't just stop at a country's borders. Oh no. It builds up into this massive global architecture, a whole other layer of financial governance that operates above any single nation.
Tucked away in Basel, Switzerland, there's a place called the Bank for International Settlements, the BIS. You might have heard it called the Central Bank for Central Banks, and that's exactly what it is. It's a private institution owned by the world's central banks, and it's where the global rules for banking get made. It's a quiet, incredibly powerful organization that coordinates how money works on a planetary scale. And then there's something called the euro-dollar market. Now, don't let the name fool you. It has nothing to do with the euro. Think of it as a vast, unregulated ocean of US dollars that exists outside the control of the United States. It's this offshore system that really acts as the heartbeat of global finance, fueling trade and investment all around the world. So we're starting to see this picture, right? Money is created privately and it's governed globally. But that just leads to a deeper question. If power isn't just held in these abstract systems, who are the actual players? Who are the ones with their hands on the levers? Well, that line of questioning leads us to an absolutely stunning concentration of financial power, held by just a handful of asset management firms. They've become so big, they're now the largest owners of, well, pretty much everything. Let's start with the biggest one, BlackRock. The amount of money they manage is $10 trillion. To put that in perspective, that single number is bigger than the entire yearly economic output of every country on Earth except for the US and China. Then you have Vanguard, the behemoth of passive investing. They're overseeing more than $7 trillion. And rounding out what's known as the Big Three is State Street, with about $4 trillion. So just between those three firms, you're looking at over $20 trillion. They are the largest shareholders in nearly 90% of the biggest publicly traded companies. This isn't just about owning stocks. It's about a consolidation of voting power that can steer corporate America and, by extension, the global economy. Because they mostly operate through index funds, these firms have become what one academic review called the new permanent owners of the corporate world. Think about that phrase. They can't just sell off their shares if they don't like a company. Their whole model is to own the entire market. And that gives them permanent and truly immense influence. But it's not just about how big they are. It's about how interconnected everything is. Some incredible research has actually mapped out a hidden structure sitting right at the very heart of the global economy. So back in 2011, a few researchers in Zurich did something groundbreaking. They took a massive data set of 43,000 transnational corporations and started mapping out who owns who. What they found was a structure that was shockingly centralized. At the dead center of this vast global network, they found a tightly knit core of just 147 companies. This tiny group, made up mostly of financial institutions, was massively interconnected, with all of them owning shares in each other. And here's the kicker. This core of 147 companies, through this dense web of ownership, controlled roughly 40% of the total economic value of the entire 43,000 company network. The researchers actually called it a super entity, a massive concentration of power at the very heart of global capitalism.
Okay, so we've got private money creation, we've got supranational governance, and we have a core of corporate control. But a system this big needs an anchor, right? Something to give it stability and real power. Well, that anchor was forged in a secret deal almost 50 years ago, a deal that tied the world's money to the world's most vital commodity.
See, after World War II, the US dollar was pegged to gold. But by 1971, the US couldn't honor that promise anymore, and it broke the link. This created a huge crisis. To make sure the dollar stayed on top, a new anchor was needed. So the US made a deal with Saudi Arabia. In exchange for military protection, Saudi Arabia would agree to price all of its oil sales exclusively in US dollars. And just like that, the petrodollar system was born. The single deal created what's famously called an exorbitant privilege for the United States. Because every country on Earth needs oil, every country on Earth now needed US dollars to buy it. This created a permanent artificial global demand for American currency. And the consequences of this system are profound. It lets the US run massive budget deficits because it knows other nations have to buy its debt. It helps finance a global military presence. And it cements the dollar's role as the world's reserve currency, which gives the US a level of economic and geopolitical power that's unparalleled. The financial system and global power are two sides of the very same coin. Which, of course, brings us all the way back to our original question. We've peeled back all these layers, right? We have private banks that create the money, a central bank of central banks that sets the rules, a few giant asset managers that own the corporate world, a tightly knit super entity at its core, and this whole thing is anchored to a geopolitical deal that ties the system to oil and the dollar. So who really controls the money? The question itself almost implies there's a single person, a single hand on the lever. But the reality is a complex, interlocking system of power with no single center. It's a network of institutions, agreements, and concentrated ownership that has evolved over decades, operating largely out of public view. The answer isn't a person or even a single group. It's the architecture of the system itself. And maybe that's the most powerful form of control there is.